Welcome to Pop-O-Holics, the show about hot takes hotter than pancakes. You're watching the weekly upload for September 12th, 2022, in which myself and my co-host go over all the recent pop culture and film news. I'm Chris Conkling, your substitute host, and as always, I'm joined by one of my best friends,
Brian Dupree.
Brian, how are you, sir? How's your week been?
It has been great. I actually just got back from a long weekend. I got to go on a bachelor party trip for my sister's fiance's bachelor party. Got to meet a bunch of his close friends and some of my cousins, and we all had an amazing time. It was so much fun, and now I'm in recovery mode this week. So just taking it easy.
And maybe you made a little dinero along the way, perhaps?
I'm not usually the lucky one in the family, but this trip I had the magic touch and was actually able to take a little bit of money from the casino, which is rare.
That's the way to do it. So what is Pop-O-Holics? We're not here to talk about our personal lives entirely. Brian's newest earnings while cruising around, having a blast.
Killer craps roll. I've developed it.
Typically, here on Pop-O-Holics, there's usually three of us. We have our usual host, Christian Katie. However, currently, he and his fiance and his son are moving. So, like we did at the beginning of the year, Christian's going to be on a bit of a hiatus, and Brian and I are going to take the wheel. So, for the next couple weeks, it's just going to be both of our beautiful faces here. But we're going to change it up a little bit. The typical show format is Brian will talk about the wackiest of news coming out in Hollywood and in the pop culture zeitgeist, and then we'll talk about what we've been consuming. However, we are going to start with our community feedback section to get a little housekeeping out of the way. Then we're going to talk about the news, and then Brian and I have decided to cover one thing in our quick hits section, which tonight is going to be The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. So get excited about that. So why don't we kick it off with some community feedback, or our community section. Brian, we have a Throwback Thursday episode coming up this Thursday. We're going to be re-releasing our Airplane episode. Back in 2020, when the world was going to hell, we decided to do a slapstick-themed month here on Pop-O-Holics, where we watched a bunch of comedies. Last week, we re-released our episode for Blazing Saddles. And again, this Thursday, we're going to resend out the link on our Twitter feed and all of our social medias. So if you haven't heard it, if you're joining us for the first time, you can go back and listen to that episode. We had a great guest, Roger Hughes, on the show during that episode. He's an airplane fanatic, from what I remember. So it was a blast having him. It was a lot of fun. If I remember, I won't give my opinions on Airplane. Go listen to the episode. Is there anything that you want to add about that Airplane episode, Brian?
No, this was, I may have seen that movie when I was young and had very little recollection of it. So this was pretty much my first time seeing Airplane. So if you want to see my fresh takes, definitely go check that out.
And then, of course, last month, we had a giveaway, didn't we? We gave away a digital 4K copy of the original Predator movie in connection with our Predator month. This month, we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to be giving away a 4K digital copy of Spider-Man No Way Home. Yes, the Spider-Man No Way Home that cracked $1 billion in December of last year. And all you have to do to enter the giveaway is subscribe to our YouTube channel and comment on any of these weekly uploads from September. You can comment one time per weekly upload, and that will give you one entry every time you comment. So you'll have a total of, I believe, 4 or 5 opportunities to enter our contest, as long as you're also subscribed to the channel. So remember to subscribe, comment down below, and you'll be added to the drawing for that 4K digital copy of Spider-Man No Way Home.
And just to be clear, only one comment will be good for a vote, but feel free to leave as many comments as you want down there.
Oh, of course. Yeah, if you want to get into it with another commenter, have some type of civil discourse, we're all for it. Please do. All right, guys. With that, we're going to jump into Brian's Wacky News Corner.
Start on wacky, start on wacky. Start on wacky, start on wacky. Welcome back, everyone. So, the first piece of news. As Chris mentioned, we will be talking about the latest Amazon Prime video series, The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, for our big quick hit this week. And unfortunately, as expected, another fantasy show has come out with people of color as exist in the world and as have always existed in the world, and people online who are largely just unfortunate racists and cannot stand to have people who look differently from themselves or outside of what they perceive this world and the characters within this world to for them supposed to be a certain way, even within the text of Tolkien's novels, there are people of color and they're described as such. So with that being said, it has been very, very unfortunate. And thankfully, Disney with Star Wars a few years back, since a situation with John Boyega that was handled very poorly to a large degree, as well as Kelly Marie Tran, I think studios have finally, and not just studios, but the people involved with these productions are finally starting to wake up to how we have to be vocally against this stuff in order to make it clear that there's no room in these fandoms for this sort of out and out racism that is completely without merit, of course. So thankfully, the cast of both the recent series, the one that's ongoing now, and the original trilogy have spoken out against this sort of thing. The statement goes, "We, the cast of Rings of Power, stand together in absolute solidarity and against the relentless racism, threats, harassment, and abuse some of our castmates of color are being subjected to on a daily basis. We refuse to ignore it or tolerate it." The statement goes on, and you can reference it here in the show notes. I point to a Deadline article that lays it out. It also talks about some of the original cast who also put out a message online. Elijah Wood, Billy Boyd, and Dominic Moynihan from the original movie saying, "You are all welcome here." They also have some merch that is benefiting organizations that support people of color as well. So it's refreshing to see this and for it to be so instantaneous, because people often forget that although it seems like it could be just online, there are real world threats that come with all of this sort of speech. And, I'm sure some of these actors have gotten death threats and continue to get death threats and will. And this is something that is completely unacceptable. And obviously it's not something that's new, but it's very good to see that the studio system and the actors involved are speaking out so clearly against this stuff. I apologize for not being the best at talking about all this stuff. I know this is not our wheelhouse generally on the Pop-O-Holics, but it is important stuff. And this sort of thing, as they said, should not and cannot be tolerated.
Agreed.
In any ideal space. So, Chris, what's going on? What's going on here?
I think it's important that we talk about this, Brian, because not only is it topical to what's happening in society currently, but, we're also going to be talking about the Rings of Power later on in the episode. And this is something that I think needed to be addressed. And while I'm not surprised that this is taking place, it does sadden me, and it is unfortunate that things like this are still taking place in a multitude of fandoms, not just Lord of the Rings.
Right.
Being a nerd and finding a fandom that you cherish and love, it's, being a part of a community should be genderless and without race. Like, you should just feel included within whatever type of fictional thing that you're obsessed with, and putting Tolkien's writing into context, like, yes, he wrote these stories in the mid 1900s where, they were still dealing with a lot of things that we're dealing with today. And Tolkien was predominantly surrounded by white people, you know? So like when going into writing these books, he doesn't really take, you know, our real world races into account. The Lord of the Rings itself does tell a story about a multitude of different races. And it's just sad that we have fans who like something like that who are racist themselves. And it's just absolutely unacceptable. Like
it almost seems like what they want. It's like, oh, okay, if we're only going to be in the UK, so you want this to be the prequel to the current monarchy? Is that what's going to be interesting fantasy to you? That's just dumb. Right. You know, like nobody wants that. And it's just, you know, and that's not what they want, of course. You know, they're just hiding their hatred behind, you know, baseless claims about quality, right? Because spoiling my thoughts, this show is incredible.
It's great.
And I'm really excited to talk about it. I apologize for cutting you off, Chris.
No. I was just going to say, you know, hopefully eventually we can all move past this and people can just enjoy what they enjoy without fearing that they're going to be threatened in some way, shape, or form. So I'm glad that the current cast of the show of The Rings of Power have spoken out against this. I'm glad that the former cast of these Lord of the Rings projects have spoken out against this. Those that spread hate into the world need to know that it's unacceptable and we will not tolerate it. So good for them for doing this.
Yeah, so that's the Lord of the Rings of Power. We'll be talking about it a bit more later, and there's plenty to read online if you want to get into all of that nastiness. But I'd recommend that you largely don't get into it. The next piece of news: Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery. This highly anticipated sequel to Knives Out. Knives Out, kind of a surprise smash success from Rian Johnson. Got a giant over $400 million deal with Netflix to make the next two movies. And we're finally getting a teaser trailer for this that just came out in the last day or two as of recording. This follows Detective Benoit Blanc, played by Daniel Craig in the lead role. This time he'll be interrogating a new ensemble cast, which includes Dave Bautista, Edward Norton, Janelle Monáe, Catherine Hahn, Leslie Odom Jr., Kate Hudson, Madeline Klein, Jessica Henwick, and Ethan Hawke. It is set in Greece on a private island of a tech billionaire played by Edward Norton. And this movie looks ridiculously fun. The trailer is so stylized and makes me think there might be some sort of game within a game thing happening here, which I'm completely in for. With this cast of characters and Rian Johnson at the helm, I don't see how this isn't going to be one of my favorite movies of the year. I'm very highly looking forward to this one. Chris, I know we've talked about this a good deal as news has come out about it, but what did you think of this trailer now that we'll be able to see it?
Dude, I'm so happy that we finally got actual footage from this film. I could not be more excited about this movie coming out. We've spoken about the original Knives Out here on the show, as you mentioned. We're all, Christian included, are huge fans of that film and Rian Johnson as a director. The premise, based on what we saw in the trailer, as you mentioned, it looks like it's going to be some type of maybe escape room / murder mystery themed game that they're getting themselves into, which ends up being a genuine murder mystery. And
I'm wondering if it's not like some sort of almost like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, like
it could be
escape to an island for a weekend with the billionaire kind of thing, you know?
It definitely could be. Either way, I'm just incredibly excited. I love Daniel Craig's Benoit Blanc in the first film. I'm so excited that they made him like this Hercule Poirot, where he's going to be involved in a bunch of different films in this kind of cinematic universe. I use that verbiage. I don't really want to use that verbiage because it's used so frequently in the industry these days, but like that's really kind of what Rian Johnson is building. He's building his own Agatha Christie-esque film universe, and I'm absolutely here for it. So yeah, if you haven't seen the Glass Onion trailer yet, highly recommend going and seeking it out if you're the type of person that isn't opposed to watching trailers. I know that Christian Katie, our usual host here on the Pop-O-Holics, does not like watching trailers, which is understandable. But
I will say, this doesn't seem to give much at all away about plot.
No.
It is very much a style trailer.
A teaser, if you
and just
will.
showing us all of the characters who are involved, right? It's a true teaser. So, but I do understand that. So that will be coming out on Netflix December 23rd of this year. So definitely stay tuned for that. Moving into our last piece of news proper, we have some casting in the new TV show from a limited series from Steven Soderbergh and Ed Solomon. Claire Danes and Zazie Beetz have just been cast in the last couple of days. This series follows an investigation into a botched kidnapping that uncovers long-held secrets connecting multiple characters and cultures in present-day New York City. We don't know who Danes and Beetz are playing at this point. I'm not too familiar with Claire Danes' work. She started out, got a breakout role in My So-Called Life in the 90s before being in Romeo and Juliet, the Baz Luhrmann adaptation, playing Juliet, something that is a big miss for me. Definitely, I know, I haven't seen this one. Zazie Beetz, more recently, obviously one of the stars of Atlanta. I loved her performance in 9 Days last year, one of my favorite movies of last year. She's doing consistently incredible work. She was in Joker as well. These two people, this team who worked on No Sudden Move together as well, which is a great HBO Max movie that Steven Soderbergh did. Great ensemble cast movie there as well. This team together, it's hard for me to say no. Soderbergh is someone who makes eminently watchable movies. So this is obviously a series, which he's directing all 6 episodes of. It's a limited series. This is going to be great, I think. I don't think you ever saw No Sudden Move. Did you, Chris?
Did had you it end on up my seeing list, that? Brian, and I neglected to watch it.
Okay.
I hope that it doesn't end up falling into the category of A Promising Young Woman, which I still haven't seen. Thankfully, Christian isn't here to play the audio clip.
I know, we need to.
But it's still on my radar. I need to get to watching it. In regards to this combo of Claire Danes and Zazie Beetz, I think it's a really interesting combination. As you mentioned, we have Steven Soderbergh kind of show running the entire thing and directing all the episodes. This is going to be something special. And while we don't know a ton about it at the moment, I think it's going to be a really interesting project. Like you said, having Soderbergh attached to it is kind of like an automatic watch for most people. So I'm excited to see what they do with this show.
Yeah, definitely a very easy sell there. So that is Claire Danes and Zazie Beetz, who have been cast in Full Circle, which is the upcoming HBO Max series from Steven Soderbergh and Ed Solomon. All right, moving into stuff that's happening this week. The 74th Primetime Emmy Awards are happening this Monday night. I guess there was a little bit of rearranging because of football that happened here, but they will be happening on the 12th. You can look up the previous award show, the Primetime Creative Arts Emmy Awards. Some of the, I'm not exactly sure. I didn't look too deeply into how these are separated, but there have been some awards that have been given out already. And then the official Primetime slot, we'll do the rest of them this Monday.
Some very popular footage of Harry Styles spitting on Chris Pine over the weekend from the ceremony. So
was that from that ceremony?
I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
So I'm sure at least most people on Twitter have
on
seen,
him.
Right? Allegedly.
Yes. We're not gonna touch all of that. But okay, so that was at the initial awards, you're saying. Do you watch the Emmys? I know I've kind of gotten into watching the Oscars over the past couple years. I'll probably watch the Emmys again this year. I did watch them last year as well. Do you have a history watching the Emmys, and will you tune in?
Brian, as you know, I've been without actual cable for almost a decade. And only recently, within the last year, have my wife and I actually signed up for a basic cable program. Typically, when I was in college, it was all about the Oscars. Like, the Oscars was what I set time aside for to watch every single year. All the other award shows, I would just catch all the winners online the next day. So I've never really been not to say that I'm not a fan of the Emmys, but I've never set aside the time to sit through them while they're taking place live. It's really just like an information dump for me the next day. So I even though I have basic cable now, I probably won't watch the ceremony. I'll just do as I always did. Are you going to watch it this year?
I'm debating. I have to see, because it will be streaming on Peacock as well if you don't have a full streaming package. But I do currently have access to cable, so I think I'll probably tune in for at least a bit of this.
At the very least, we'll most likely be covering all the winners the following week here on the show. So loyal listeners and viewers, you can count on us talking about that.
Yeah, so tune in next week for us breaking down who won and how we feel about that. Moving into some other stuff that's coming out this week. Atlanta season 4, the final season of Atlanta, is premiering September 15th, this coming Thursday. I am woefully behind. I'm halfway through season 1 still in Atlanta, which is just honestly completely disrespectful. And I need to get on it because I've loved what I've seen and I just have to make it happen.
Brian, but don't feel bad. I started season 3. I've loved everything that they've made surrounding the show, but I never finished season 3. I know Christian finished it.
Okay.
So I also need to catch up on season 3 prior to starting season 4. But from what I've seen, the first 2 seasons and the first couple episodes of season 3, it's a fantastic show. We've talked about it here on the podcast before. So
yeah, this is the impetus. We got to get back into it going into season 4 so we could watch the show end together, hopefully. This is created and showrun by Donald Glover. It stars Donald Glover, Brian Tyree Henry, Lakeith Stanfield, and Zazie Beetz, and follows Earn, who's played by Brian Tyree Henry, during his daily life in Atlanta, Georgia, as he tries to, Earn, played by Donald Glover, during his daily life in Atlanta, Georgia, as he tries to redeem himself in the eyes of his ex-girlfriend, Van, who's played by Beetz, who's also the mother of his daughter, Lottie, as well as his parents and his cousins, Alfred, who raps under the stage name Paperboy. He also has an eccentric right-hand man who is incredibly played by Lakeith Stanfield. This is just the high level of the show. In season 3, they were in Europe, and they're going to be back in Atlanta for the final season. What else can I say about this? It's acclaimed. It's supposed to be incredible. Last season was really well received, and I anticipate this one will be as well. So if you have not checked out Atlanta, go ahead and catch up because that will be premiering this Thursday on FX. Moving into some movies that are coming out this week. We have The Woman King that'll be in theaters this Friday. So this is a historical epic about the Agoji, the all-female warrior unit who protected the West African kingdom of Dahomey in the 19th century. It stars Viola Davis as a general who trains the next generation of warriors to fight their enemies. It's directed by Gina Prince Bythewood, who you may know most recently from The Old Guard, but she's been directing for a long time, as far back as Love and Basketball in 2000. It also stars Thuso Mbedu, Lashana Lynch, Sheila Atim, and John Boyega. This movie looks epic and intense and awesome. It's obviously based on a true story as well. Very much going to be a story that most people in the West haven't heard, probably. We don't get a lot of history that is from Africa, and I think this is very much underserved in terms of things being produced about this. So super exciting with this cast and director. This movie looks like it could be a real hit. I don't know if it's going to be something that's going to have huge mainstream appeal. Unfortunately, historical epics generally don't, but I will definitely be checking this one out. That is The Woman King that'll be in theaters this Friday. A movie that we've talked about before when the first trailer came out will also be out in theaters this Friday. This is See How They Run. This is the premise of this. A desperate American Hollywood film producer visiting London in the 1950s sets out to adapt a popular play into a film, but things go off the rails when members of the production crew start getting murdered. We follow our two main characters, a couple of constables played by Sam Rockwell and Saoirse Ronan. But we also have Adrian Brody, Ruth Wilson, Reese Shearsmith, Harris Dickinson, and David Oyelowo in the cast. Great ensemble cast. The trailer for this looks silly and perfect and very much the type of movie that I want to see. Kind of in that same realm of Knives Out, maybe a little more on the like pure slapstick kind of comedy side of things, but very much here for this movie. Directed by Tom George, written by Mark Chappell. That will be out this Friday.
You know, Brian, I almost asked if you wanted to cover this film next week, but I decided, I'm saying it here live, but I decided not to officially ask you because when Christian leaves, we tend to turn Pop-O-Holics into a murder mystery fest for some reason.
You're not wrong.
In February, during his hiatus, we reviewed The After Party and Death on the Nile. I'm pretty sure there was a third one in there as well. I can't remember, but it seemed to be a genre that we kind of gravitated towards. We always wanted to do a Agatha Christie month. We never got around to it here on the show. But loyal listeners and viewers, if you want us to talk about See How They Run in the future, we don't necessarily have to do it next week, but email us at popaholicscast@gmail.com. We love hearing from you. And if it's something you guys want to hear our opinions on, Brian and I would happily talk about another murder mystery film.
Please tell us to. So yeah, that's See How They Run. That'll be in theaters this Friday. The last movie that's coming out this week will be on Netflix this Friday, and it's called Do Revenge. So this is a Black comedy directed by Jennifer Caton Robinson, who most recently co-wrote Thor: Love and Thunder with Taika Waititi. So our listeners will definitely be fans of that. It stars Camila Mendez, Maya Hawke, Reese Shaw, Sophie Turner, and Austin Abrams, and was inspired by Alfred Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train. The plot of this follows two high school students who both have their lives upended and become rejected by their high school. Someone leaks a photo of one of our characters, and they together decide to get their revenge on the people who have wronged them or who they feel have wronged them. And Maya Hawke is someone who I was introduced to through Stranger Things. She's been in a few other things since then. I think she's great. And this is kind of an easy sell for me, her being in this. But this movie's coming to Netflix. Looks like it could be a decent amount of fun. And with the director having co-written this movie with Celeste Ballard and previously co-written Thor: Love and Thunder, a movie that I really enjoyed, I think there's a lot of great working parts here that could make this a solid move for Netflix. Did you get to watch this trailer, Chris? What did you think of this?
Yeah, the trailer looks like a lot of fun. Netflix movies, as we've mentioned here before on the podcast, don't have the best track record.
Hit or miss for sure.
I love Maya Hawke, and it looks like she's delivering a entertaining performance. So I might check it out. I'll see if maybe the wife wants to watch it, and we'll go from there. But it looks fun. I always hope for the best when it comes to Netflix films. So we'll see.
Seems like a decent potential family night movie. I might throw it out, or a family movie night movie at some point. But yeah, so that is Do Revenge. That'll be on Netflix this Friday. And that wraps it up for the news.
Brian, so wacky. Always
Extra
delivering the wackiest. Without Christian here, I feel
wibbly wobbly wacky.
Whoa, wacky. I feel like there isn't as much zaniness to go around. Christian, we know you're listening. We miss you dearly. Come back as soon as possible.
Please.
I'm just not as wacky a host as he is, Brian, and I apologize for that. However,
okay.
I appreciate you showing up, and I appreciate you delivering the news to all our loyal listeners and viewers. With that, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power.
My brother gave his life hunting the enemy. His task is now mine. Speak your truth. We already know. Stand with me. Ours was no chance meeting. Search your mind. Not fate, nor destiny. Ours was the work of something greater.
Each of us, everyone, must decide who we shall be.
That was from the trailer of Amazon Prime's The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, a new show that just launched last week. Brian and I are going to talk about the first 2 episodes. According to IMDb, it's this epic drama set thousands of years before the events of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, follows an ensemble cast of characters, both familiar and new, as they confront the long-feared reemergence of evil to Middle-earth. Very ominous. This is based on The Lord of the Rings appendices by J.R.R. Tolkien. That's a very important distinction, considering that Amazon does not have the rights to the Hobbit or Lord of the Rings films, and they also don't have the rights to the Silmarillion. It was kind of a point of contention when production was starting to be announced as the show was being created. They do, however, have the rights to the books, and therefore can reference kind of like the supplemental material in the appendices. So that, Brian, earlier off mic, you were mentioning how quick the pace of the show is, and the story takes place in the Second Age, but they're going to be spanning about 3,000 years. The Second Age is about 3,000 years from when The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings take place. So that could be why you're feeling like an expedited pace, because they have a lot of ground to cover and they're going to kind of like smoosh it all together so we can get there within the 5 seasons. Anyway, the show is developed by J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay. These first 2 episodes were directed by J.A. Bayona, a director who we recently talked about when we covered Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. Go check out that episode to hear our opinions on it. These first 2 episodes were written by J.D. Payne, Patrick McKay, and Jennifer Hutchinson. The theme is by Howard Shore, composer who wrote all the music for Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, as well as the Hobbit trilogy. Fantastic composer. The score for this show is actually composed by Bear McCreary, another epic composer. He writes absolutely wonderful music.
I don't think you like him at all, Chris. There's no shows that he scored that you're partial to.
None whatsoever. And they're definitely not animated fantasy shows either.
Yep.
So we can just kind of like let that rest there. In regards to the budget, we've spoken multiple times here on the show about how this is going to end up being the most expensive television show of all time. To get the rights alone, Amazon spent, I believe, $250 million. So by the time the show's finished with all of its seasons and all of its production, it will have at least cost $1 billion to make. Which,
yes, they're saying 100 to 150 per season.
Yeah,
in 5 seasons plus that 250. So
it's a lot of money. So thankfully, we'll be talking about the show, and I really think you can kind of see that money on screen, which is a good sign. The show stars, there are a ton of characters. This is spanning a whole bunch of different stories within the appendices of Tolkien's work. So we're going to go over some of the main characters. It stars Morfinn Clark as Galadriel, Robert Arameo as Elrod, Markella Kavanaugh as Nori Brandyfoot, Ishmael Cruz Cordova as Arondir, Nazine, how do you pronounce her last name? Boniadi as Bronwyn, Owain Arthur as Durin IV, Daniel Wayman as the Stranger, and then Maxim Alexander Baldry as a character that I'm not going to reference because it would be a huge spoiler
and I
for
actually
these
don't know
first 2 episodes, and I don't want to
is.
ruin that surprise for anybody. But he is in the show, and he's in these first 2 episodes, and I can't wait to see where that character goes. We're going to dive in first with some of our personal history with Lord of the Rings and J.R.R. Tolkien's work, and then we're going to give our non-spoiler thoughts on these first 2 episodes. Then we're going to talk about some of the standout moments, and we're going to wrap up with our closing thoughts. That said, Brian, what's your personal history with the Lord of the Rings or Tolkien's work? Like, when did you first come to experience this stuff?
So I was first introduced in like some point in elementary school, my aunt was always really big into the Lord of the Rings series. And at some point, I'm not sure if she prompted it or I just got it from the library, but I did read The Hobbit at some point in elementary school and was a big fan of that. And at various points throughout my life, I have tried to read Fellowship. And I tried at least once in elementary school, and I just could not get past the first chapter or two. I think I tried again in middle school, maybe again in high school, and I just have never been able to make it through much more than a couple chapters in Fellowship, unfortunately. But I did see all of the movies and loved the Peter Jackson movies. At some point, we're Florida boys, so we have hurricanes here. And there was a hurricane that came at some point, and we had school off, and my aunt did a marathon of all three of the Peter Jackson movies back to back that I didn't watch the whole thing of, but I know I popped in here and there.
I think I depending on the hurricane, I may have been doing the exact same thing while your aunt was doing that.
It's perfect. Like, who needs an excuse? But it's a great excuse to do it. So yeah, I have always been a fan of these. I remember it was either late elementary school or early middle school. I chose to do a biography on Tolkien and like read I don't know if it was his autobiography. There was a book that was using as a reference. It was much more boring than I thought it was, but I loved conceptually all the world building and how much he had put into developing his own language. And from a very early on, I was blown away by all of that stuff and the intricacies of his art.
Yeah, I have how should I put this? I absolutely love this franchise. I love Peter Jackson's original trilogy. Those films remind me of being like mid 12 to 13 years old. They always came out around Christmas time. To me, when I rewatch those movies, I think about like finishing my final exams for the first semester of the year and then going into winter break. My dad would always take me and like the other employees at his office to see these films when they were released. The Hobbit films, I even have a little bit of sentiment connected to because when I first started dating my wife, no one else in our family would go to see those Hobbit films with my father-in-law. So they were actually the first opportunity that he and I got to like spend and bond and be together, just us, and start to build that relationship. I think I've told this story multiple times, how I actually asked my father-in-law if I could, for his permission to propose to my wife after we saw Battle of the Five Armies. So despite how everyone feels about that movie and it probably being the worst film out of those 6 films, I do hold a special place in my heart for that movie solely because of that moment. I've read The Hobbit. I've read Lord of the Rings. I've listened to Andy Serkis narrate the audiobooks for The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. I've talked about that here on Quick Hits on the Pop-O-Holics. I have a replica Sting to my left sitting right next to me right now. So I'm just a huge fan of this series and how it always takes me to like this transcendental place. As Brian mentioned, what Tolkien has done in terms of world building here, he's added a level of verisimilitude. And I think that's a key word whenever you're talking about anything Tolkien related to his books, which Peter Jackson has gone and adapted to film. It just feels like a real history, taking the time to create all the languages for Middle Earth and all of its different races. It does feel like something that could have taken place prior to our current age. And I've always really enjoyed that about this particular book series. As loyal listeners and viewers will know, I'm a huge fan of lore and mythology and world building, and this just feeds everything that I love about storytelling. So, long story short, I absolutely love this franchise.
I got to go through the books. I got to get through them at some point. This is a life goal.
I totally understand how hard it is because I tried to read them when I was when I was in elementary school. I tried to read them again when I was in high school, and then I finally got through them when I was in college. So you really just have to like push yourself to be fully immersed in what Tolkien's doing. I totally understand though how it can feel a little bit like a slog at the very beginning when you're reading them. So I get it. No judgment whatsoever. So that's Brian and my personal history with J.R.R. Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings series. Let's talk about these first 2 episodes of The Rings of Power. Brian, how did you feel about these first 2 episodes?
I should have known at the price point what we were getting into, but even still, I was not prepared just for how astonishingly beautiful the show actually is, just moment to moment. From very early on, they are almost just flexing, like jumping around continents like it's nothing. Beautiful, insanely gorgeous vistas to spare, shot on location in New Zealand, but still feels fresh and different than the sort of vistas we get in Peter Jackson's vision of this. So just immediately, it was all on the screen. And this in collaboration with, obviously, there's some effects that are happening here with our cities, but the sets and the effects combine seamlessly well. I've seen some, there's been some complaints online. I did switch off motion smoothing on my TV. This is something that I didn't know how to do until recently. So if you want to watch this show how it deserves to be watched, definitely get your TV in the ideal settings and turn off motion smoothing, because it is worth it. And the show just absolutely shines as a result of it. I think I really liked how we get this entry point with Galadriel, who is someone who I knew from the previous movies, obviously. And she's almost, we get the show starts with almost kind of like a creation story of before Earth as we know it, where Galadriel was a kid. And it reminded me of something like The Sandman, in the sense of giving the perspective of what sort of creatures elves are and the scope of their existence. And starting us there really helped kind of give this interesting context that I've really enjoyed following through and seeing where she comes from and what drives her. Wasn't expecting. There was a bit in episode 1 that I kind of saw coming because of a recent Marvel show, and because you kind of just see it coming anyway. I'm not going to get into anything specifically, but I think you know what I'm talking about, probably, Chris, there. I think that the new characters are amazing as well, though, and some of my favorites. We have Arondir, and seeing how ever since the previous issues happened on Earth, the elves are kind of occupying the human territories in some sense, very much have them under their thumb, keeping an eye on them, although as we see, some of them are friendlier than others with the humans, and we'll get into some of that.
Very friendly.
So some are very friendly. Yes. Seeing the Harfoots, just a group that I'm not sure if they were mentioned too much in the original trilogy, and I haven't seen all of the Hobbit movies. I only saw the first one.
So from my understanding, from what I've heard and read about the production of this, I don't know if Amazon actually has the rights to the word Hobbit. So I think calling them Harfoots is kind of like a way to legally get around. Like, they are definitely hobbits. Like, they are blatantly hobbits, you know? But the Harfoots are more of ancestors of, like, what we know to be hobbits in the Third Age of Middle Earth, right?
I see.
Yeah, I don't know if they initially wanted to call them Harfoots, but I think legally they kind of had to.
Okay. All right. That actually makes a lot of sense, considering we don't get introduced to any hobbits here. I didn't immediately make the connection, although now that you say it, I feel kind of silly for not. No. I'm glad you pointed out. This makes perfect sense. I didn't know they were kind of a nomadic people prior, because when we're introduced to them later, that's
They've
very much
settled in the Shire by that point.
That's right.
Right. So who's to say we might end up seeing that in the show?
Okay.
That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. So, but needless to say, I think everything that's happening there, just with the type of lifestyle they lead and the sorts of knowledge that they've collected, and that we're just getting hints at this point, I think all of that is really interesting. And there's some characters who are introduced there that are like, I don't know where they're going, but I'm excited to follow them. And then possibly my favorite, the dwarf prince, Durin. I love him so much. We'll get into favorite moments. He just stand out for me. And the Dwarf City that we see is just
beautiful,
completely astonishing. Like, there are waterfalls built into the mountain and the structures, and it's just incredible. It's obviously not all sets, but you're absolutely there, and it works so well. And it's just the type of thing that you don't see on TV often, and especially with how fast they're hopping around between locations. Maybe you'd get one of these per episode. We're getting 4 or 5 giant, beautiful locations per episode, and it's a lot to take in. Plus all the plot that's happening, which is really compelling on top of it. So lastly, I know I'm rambling here. I think I'll just say that the show is surprising me in how relevant it feels to the modern day and kind of some of the things that it's dealing with. And I don't want to say too much about that because it's really more plot stuff. But I kind of went in with not expecting much from this show. And this is something that is going to be competing for my best of the year 100%.
That's
at this point.
Yeah, I echo so many of the things that you mentioned, Brian. The show is absolutely stunning. I'm so pleased that, considering it costs so much money to make, it legitimately feels cinematic in nature. Like, it does not feel like a television show. That each episode feels like a movie in and of itself. In fact, while I was watching it, my wife was kind of sitting next to me, kind of passively watching the show, and she looked up at one point and was like, "This looks like a movie." So, like, even someone who isn't fully engaged in the show can recognize how beautiful each individual shot is. I'm one of my main concerns going into this show, as I mentioned, Amazon did not have rights to the Silmarillion, so I was kind of concerned about the amount of material that they were going to be able to utilize to make the show. But I have to say, I'm just really pleased. I'm excited to see where the show goes. My hope was that the creators of the show would take the same type of care that Peter Jackson took when he made both of those trilogies, because as I mentioned earlier, there's a level of verisimilitude in both Tolkien's writing and Peter Jackson's adaptation that makes you feel as though everything could have existed. You know, like we are watching the early ages of man, and experiencing what all of these other races experienced prior to the rise of man and such. And the show delivers on that. And it's so incredibly impressive. You mentioned going to the Dwarven city. What is it? Khazad-dûm, I think. Don't come after me.
Yeah, I wasn't even going to try.
I didn't have it written down. And we see all the elven cities, and they look as they do in Peter Jackson's films, which I know Amazon was trying to set itself apart when they made this series for legal reasons. But it brings me a lot of joy that, like, I think these two things could exist and feel as though they are part of a singular whole, which I just absolutely love. I think that Morfydd Clark is doing an excellent job as Galadriel. Like, I could potentially see that performance folding into what Cate Blanchett's doing in the original trilogy. So again, it just adds to the reality and the realness of these adaptations, and I'm totally here for it. The show's great.
It really is. I'm pretty excited about it, and now I feel like I almost feel like, should I go over and watch the other show that's happening right now too? I'm almost like,
so that's been kind of like some people's concern. I know Christian mentioned it last week or 2 weeks ago when we talked about the Rings of Power coming out, and that we have these two giant fantasy behemoths currently airing simultaneously next to one another. And I think the House of the Dragon is offering something so different from what the Rings of Power is offering. Yes, we can juxtapose the two shows and say, like, no, which is better? But I think you're getting two very different fantasy experiences from each. You know, the House of the Dragon is very much like a political fantasy story, whereas Lord of the Rings, while it has political elements, certainly kind of revels in the fantasy world building of it all, you know. And that doesn't mean there aren't fantastic elements to House of Dragons. I mean, you have fucking dragons in the show, you know. With the original Game of Thrones show, there was less of that for the most part, at least for a couple of seasons. But again, I think they're offering such different things. I think you could watch both simultaneously and not feel exhausted by all the fantasy, as some people were concerned. So
Okay.
I would say go for it, Brian. Again, it's a prequel, so you don't necessarily need to watch all the Game of Thrones episodes to watch this other show.
All right, maybe.
Do you have anything else that you want to add before we jump into spoilers and some of our favorite moments from the episodes?
I think that's pretty much it. If you were thinking about watching this show, pull the trigger. I mean, it's, I was very surprised, very pleasantly surprised, and can't wait to continue it. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, loyal listeners and viewers. So with that, we're going to jump right into spoilers with some of our favorite moments. All right, Brian, now that we're talking about spoilers, I know you mentioned something earlier, but what moments from these episodes really stuck out to you?
Some of just the visuals. One in particular that was particularly immersive. There's a shot in the first episode where the party of elves is traveling and they're stuck in like a windstorm. And we just get this like 4-second shot of them just really going through it. And we can see the wind just nearly toppling them over. And it felt like I was there with them on that mountain. And combined with the larger shots, but what really stuck with me was this small shot, was just like, oh yeah, they are actually in this environment. I was completely sold on it. And there are just moments like that constantly throughout all of these episodes. But that one in particular was something where I was just like, this is exactly what I'm looking for from this show.
It's really great and interesting to see Galadriel at this point in time, because from what we've seen of her in the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, while we know that this past has kind of existed, she isn't very warrior-like, you know? But in this first episode, we get this amazing sequence where she like jumps off the sword of another elf and then like does all these flips and kind of cuts up this ice cave troll that they're battling. It's just really cool to see her in this capacity, opposed to like how we know her in the Cate Blanchett performance. She's a badass, to say the least.
Oh, undeniably. Yeah. And I don't know, it feels like I don't know why I was comparing it, but I kept thinking of the Blues Brothers line, like, we're on a mission from God. It's just like Galadriel's got a mission and no one is getting her off her path.
Definitely.
I love it. It's perfect. It's a perfect driving force, and bringing her brother into it and obviously kind of taking the mantle. It's just, it's completely understandable. And it turns out to be valid concern. Although I guess it's questionable how much is like, if she had not, we are in spoilers now, if she had not turned back, would things have gone exactly how they do? I guess it's unclear, but it seems like they were already kind of in motion.
Rise to power? Is this like the stone being thrown into the lake and causing the ripple effects, you know?
Exactly. But I love these questions. I love that it's causing us to think about these things.
Me too. You know, you mentioned one of my favorite scenes earlier involving Durin the Fourth and Elrond in the Dwarven city.
Yes.
Something we haven't tackled a whole lot, at least in the adaptations, is how time is perceived between the different races. The elves especially, considering how long-lived they are compared to all the other races of Middle-earth. And this is such a wonderful and human interaction between Durin and Elrond, because Elrond hasn't been to this city to visit his friend in 20 years. To him, an elf, it seems like a blink of an eye. However, to Durin, he's offended that it's been 2 decades since one of his closest friends has come to visit him. And in that time, he's lived a life. He's gotten married and he's had children and he's 20 years older. And in the lifespan of a dwarf, while they are, you know, a little longer lived as well, like a lot of these fantastic species are a little longer lived, nothing compares to the elves, you know? And, like I said, it's just such a human interaction. There are several relationships over the course of my life that have kind of gotten away from me. And like, it doesn't mean that I don't care about those people. I still think about those people and will occasionally reach out to those people to let them know that I'm thinking about them. But it was just a really beautiful scene, in my opinion. And I love that Elrond, despite being so displaced in time because of the length of his life, can recognize the mistake that he's made and that he needs to kind of reconsider some of his relationships with other species to kind of, I guess, cherish the relationship on their time, I suppose. So it's just, I'm being very long-winded, but it was just a really unexpected and beautiful scene between the two of them.
No, this was the one moment that was obviously my favorite of the first two episodes, was how, because it starts off with the challenge and him seeing that it's like, you're not going to try and beat me at this, right? And kind of giving him that, because he knew he knew Durin wanted to beat him at this. And then seeing all of the internal, he clearly loves this man and is so hurt by the fact that he has missed and all these things that he's so proud of in his life. And when Elrond just says, congratulations on your family and your children, it's just like, oh my gosh, my heart just broke. I'm just like, oh my, and then it leading into the perfect dinner scene, which could have happened in any time, but works perfectly in this setting as well, where the ice is just breaking and eventually he's back in charge of the family
wife
again.
Welcoming Elrond in with open arms and talking about how he treats the tree that Elrond gave him as if it's
so
a third child.
Yes.
Just revealing how much love there is, like you said, between these two characters. It's really wonderful and
Absolutely.
genuine. I appreciate it.
Are
there any other moments that stand out to you?
So aside from the visual stuff, which I think is just happening constantly, I really liked the kind of political backhanded stuff that was happening with Galadriel having to sit and listen to them say, this thing that you believe that so deeply is still out there. We beat it. We won. Mm-hmm. It's over, and it was just so, again, it's this moment that immediately helps us identify with this character, because on some level, we obviously know where things are going and how that she's right, regardless of why that is. But this just feels like something that happens every day. People turning a blind eye to things that we know are impending and that can affect us all, right, and will inevitably affect us all in so many spaces that I'm sure you can think of a whole list.
We just experienced 3 years of that. Exactly.
And so, again, I talked in non-spoilers about how relevant the show felt, and just this kind of like political maneuvering, just I saw the current world in it very much.
Totally agree. And is there anything else that you want to point out about the show?
I don't know if there was any other specifics. It's the kind of show that there's so much happening that I wasn't really taking a lot of notes. I was just kind of letting it wash over me because it's huge. And I'm sure there's some like action stuff that is great and that I enjoyed in the moment that I didn't call out here, but everything seems to be really working for me here. And I don't have much negative to say about it at this point.
There's some really interesting things happening with the Harfoots, as you kind of briefly talked about earlier.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see where Daniel Wayman goes. The character he's playing currently is known as the Stranger. And it's so, I don't want to spoil anything. Speculation is he could potentially be a wizard, whether that is Gandalf falling to Earth, or maybe they've combined the blue wizards into one character. I won't get into the history of those characters. Tolkien's lore is very long-winded. There are plenty of videos out there for you to watch on YouTube that discuss this from far better Tolkien scholars than I. So I highly recommend you go and look those up. But
the blue wizards are the ones that only perform at adult comedy clubs because real dirty stuff.
Exactly. So I'm really interested to see where that character goes. Brian, you were going to say something about this?
Yeah, my mind immediately went to Gandalf or a wizard as well. I didn't know. I figured there was other stuff like you said that it could be, but I just love that he is a comet, just like the introduction of him, the Harfoots being curious and kind of saving him and getting on his good side to some degree. yeah, again, it's just like the amazing world building lore stuff that I'm sure will pay off, you know, in the coming seasons. And it really feels like, even though a lot has happened, they're laying such great groundwork that it feels like we're in good hands.
Yeah, I completely agree. We've already been introduced to Celebrimbor, the elven smith that forges all the rings of power. You know, he's currently trying to build the forge that will do so. The question is, how soon will we see the Rings of Power? Considering this is going to be a 5-season show, is it going to take place in the 5th season? Are we going to see it sooner than that? But I was surprised to see that they're already kind of laying the tracks for that plot thread so soon. But I'm here for it. It's very exciting. So, loyal listeners and viewers, I think if you can't tell, Brian and I are both very hot on the first 2 episodes of the Rings of Power. Hopefully it continues as such, and this ends up being one of the best shows of all time. I would absolutely be here for that. Brian, do you have any final thoughts about these first 2 episodes?
I don't think so. I'm hopeful that they, if they keep on at this pace, it's going to be magnificent. You know, I'm hopeful, very hopeful.
Me as well. I'm very excited to see what happens. All right, loyal listeners and viewers, that's going to do it for this weekly upload from Pop-O-Holics. You can find us on Twitter at Pop-O-Holics. You can find us on Instagram at Pop-O-Holicscast. Email us with questions, feedback, concerns, recommendations, as I mentioned earlier, at popaholicscast@gmail.com. Brian, where can our loyal listeners and viewers find you online?
You could find me on Twitter at True Pop-O-Holic.
And you can find me personally on Twitter at Chris Conkling, talking about all things nerdy. You can also find my writing on a monthly basis over on carefulforspoilers.com. We're going to close out the episode as we have been the last couple weeks with Christian's TikTok of the Week.
Nick Knock is a new app for sharing your life and creativity with Nick Cage only. Join Nick Knockers all over the globe as they do comedy skits, viral dances, challenges, lip sync videos, or just share their daily thoughts with national treasure, actor Nick Cage. Nick will like every post and even leave you a comment on your birthday. No need to worry about privacy, as literally only Nick Cage will see what you post. Hey, using Nick Knock is fun and easy. Nick's knack to Nick Knock is to not knock Nick. Trick Nick, pick on Nick, nitpick Nick, Nick's picks. Or knock knock, you're nicked. Users will be caged for a week or even permanently if they violate Nick Knock's strict terms of service. Hurry, download the app before it's gone in 60 seconds and claim 11 free Nickmojis in the nick of time to make your Nick Knocks rock and knock Nick's socks off.
Man. Nick Knock, just for Nick Cage, Nick Knock. Just for Nick Cage.